Error 404. Confession Not Found Chapter 1. The intern who broke the coffee machine on day 1. Han Jae-won had exactly one talent, and it was disaster. He didn't mean to have it. Nobody chooses to be the kind of person who trips over flat ground, who reads Conference Room B as Conference Room D, no matter how many times someone points at the sign, who once printed 400 copies of a single blank page because he pressed a button he didn't understand and then pressed it again, panicking, thinking that would fix it. Jae-won had simply been born a little too honest, a little too eager, and catastrophically too oblivious to notice when a room had gone quiet around him. Today was his first day at Nexroom, a mid-sized startup squeezed into the 9th and 10th floors of a glass building in Gangnam, the kind of place with exposed brick walls that were definitely fake, and a ball pit nobody used except for the time someone lost their phone in it for 3 weeks. Jae-won had gotten the internship through a combination of luck, a typo on his resume that accidentally made him sound qualified for UX research instead of general admin, and the fact that the HR manager had been in a hurry and hadn't read past the first line. He arrived 11 minutes early, which felt like an achievement, and celebrated by trying to make himself a coffee from the office's absurdly complicated bean-to-cup machine. 4 minutes later, there was a sound like a small engine dying, a puff of steam that smelled faintly of burning plastic, and a growing puddle of espresso creeping toward the doorway of the design team's office. "Oh no," Jae-won said to no one, crouching down with a fistful of napkins that were nowhere near enough. "Oh no, oh no, oh no. You have to hold the steam wand down, not the whole panel," said a voice above him. Jae-won looked up into the calm, faintly amused face of a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a menswear catalog that specialized in quietly terrifying. Tall, straight posture, dark hair, combed with the kind of precision that suggested either extreme self-control or a very good stylist. He wore a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearm, no tie, and somehow made startup casual look like a military uniform. "I'm so sorry," Jae-won said. "I'll pay for it. Is it expensive? Please don't let it be expensive." "It's fine. I'll have someone look at it." The man crouched, unbothered by the coffee soaking into the knee of his trousers, and began wiping the machine's panel with a handkerchief he produced from literally nowhere, like a very tidy magician. "You're the new intern." "Han Jae-won," Jae-won said, bowing so quickly he nearly headbutted the man's shoulder. I'll be more careful, I promise." The man studied him for a second too long. "Choi Tae-ho. Team lead product?" A pause. "Try the machine on the 3rd floor instead. It's older, harder to break." It was, Jae-won would later understand, the nicest thing anyone had ever said to him in the shape of an insult. Chapter 2, 3 Men and a Very Bad Idea by Lunchtime. Jae-won had already been introduced, badly, by himself, in ways that made his supervisor visibly age, to most of the office. He had called the CEO, sir, 4 times despite being told twice that she preferred Boss Ariam, or just Ariam, please, we're not the army. He had gotten lost trying to find the bathroom and ended up in the server room, where he'd apologized to a rack of blinking machines like they could hear him. He had, in one particularly memorable incident, mistaken the office's resident cat, a fat orange creature named Cheese who technically belonged to the building, not the company, for a stray, and spent 20 minutes trying to find its owner while Cheese watched him with the weary patience of a king enduring a fool. None of this would have mattered, except that 3 separate people in the office had, over the course of that single day, developed the exact same problem. They could not stop looking at him. "He's like a puppy that fell into a blender," said Kang Min-jun, sprawled backward over his chair in the marketing team's corner, watching Jae-won across the open floor attempt to staple a stack of paper, and instead staple his own sleeve to the desk. Min-jun was handsome in a loud, easy way, bleach-tip hair, an earring shaped like a tiny lightning bolt, the kind of face that photographed well from every angle because he'd simply decided it would. He was, by universal office consensus, the most charming person at Nexroom, and he knew it, and somehow that didn't make him insufferable. "I want to feed him. Is that weird?" "You want to feed everyone," said Yoon Sae-byeok, not looking up from his second monitor, where 3 different terminal windows scrolled code faster than any normal human should be able to read. Sae-byeok was the kind of quiet that made people forget he was in the room until he said something devastatingly accurate, at which point they remembered very quickly. He had the soft, slightly rumpled look of someone who'd slept at his desk more than once, hair a little too long, glasses perpetually smudged, a cardigan that had definitely seen better decades. But there was nothing soft about the way his eyes tracked Jaewon's disaster trajectory across the office with unusual, uncharacteristic focus. "I want to feed him specifically," Min-jun said. "There's a difference." Across the floor, Choi Tae-ho was doing an excellent impression of a man who was absolutely not watching the new intern try to unstaple himself from a desk using only his teeth. He was failing at this impression. His email draft, a routine quarterly update he'd been writing for 10 minutes, had exactly one sentence in it, and it was a sentence he'd typed and deleted 6 times. He was not going to admit to Min-jun, of all people, that he'd spent his lunch break Googling how to fix an intern before he electrocutes himself. None of the 3 men knew yet that the other 2 existed as competition. That would come later, and it would come badly. Chapter 3, The Rooftop Incident. Min-jun moved fast. This was generally considered his greatest strength and his most alarming trait, depending on who you asked. By the end of Jaewon's first week, Min-jun had already decided, with the confidence of a man who had never once been rejected in his life, a streak he intended to protect at all costs, that he was going to ask the disaster intern out for coffee. Not work coffee, real coffee, the kind with a question mark at the end of it. He planned it the way he planned everything, loudly in his head with excessive confidence and zero contingency planning. The rooftop garden after work, golden hour, a good angle so the city lights would be behind him. He'd texted Jaewon under the guise of marketing wants your opinion on something, come up to the roof at 6, which was not strictly a lie if you counted my opinion of you as a marketing matter. What Min-jun had not accounted for was that Nexroom's rooftop door had a fire safety sensor that had been malfunctioning for 3 days, a fact posted in a memo that had gone out that morning to all staff, which Jaewon had read, half-processed, and immediately forgotten, because he had also been reading it while simultaneously trying to figure out how the office printer's stapling function worked, which was clearly cursed. At 5:58 p.m., Jaewon propped the rooftop door open with a nearby fire extinguisher so it wouldn't lock behind him. A completely reasonable, considerate thing to do. And the sensor, already unstable, interpreted the extended door open time as an emergency and triggered the building's fire alarm. By 6:01, when Min-jun arrived at the top of the stairs with his jacket slung rakishly over one shoulder and a single perfect sentence rehearsed in his head, the entire floor was evacuating in a blaring, siren-lit stampede, and Jaewon was standing in the stairwell apologizing to a very confused security guard, while 300 employees filed past him with varying degrees of irritation. Min-jun stood there, jacket over his shoulder, sentence dying in his throat, as the fire department arrived to confirm there was, in fact, no fire, just an intern and a door. "I hate it here," Min-jun told Sae-byeok later that night, texting from a convenience store where he was drowning his sorrows in a canned coffee. "I had a whole plan." "What plan?" Sae-byeok texted back, already knowing somehow that he did not actually want the answer. Chapter 4, Everyone notices except the one person who should by the second week. The office had developed a kind of low, simmering awareness that something was happening, even if no one could say exactly what. It started with small things. Choi Tae-ho, famously the person who left the office at exactly 6:30 every day like clockwork, had been staying until 8 p.m. 3 nights running, always with some flimsy excuse about reviewing documentation. Yoon Sae-byeok, who communicated with the rest of the office primarily through Slack messages and the occasional grunt, had started actually walking over to people's desks, specifically Jaewon's desk, to check on a bug, despite the fact that Jaewon had no coding responsibilities whatsoever and would not know a bug from a feature if it bit him. And Kang Min-jun had, for the first time in recorded history, stopped flirting with the interns from the design team, which several people found more alarming than the fire alarm incident. "Something's going on with those 3, said Ariam, the CEO, watching from her glass office as Tae-ho walked past Jaewon's desk for the 4th time in an hour with a stack of papers he clearly did not need to be carrying anywhere. "They're being weird about the new kid," agreed her assistant, sipping tea. "Does the new kid know?" They both watched as Jaewon at that exact moment knocked an entire cup of pens off his desk, dropped to his knees to pick them up, and in doing so head-butted Sae-byeok, who had been crouching to help him, hard enough that Sae-byeok's glasses flew off and skittered under a filing cabinet. "No," Ariam said, "I don't think he knows anything." She was, unfortunately, completely correct. Jaewon's internal monologue during this entire period was less, 3 attractive coworkers are developing feelings for me, and more, Everyone at this company is inexplicably kind to me despite how badly I'm doing at this job, and I need to work twice as hard to deserve it. He had interpreted Tae-ho's hovering as supervisory concern reasonable, given the coffee machine incident. He had interpreted Sae-byeok's frequent desk visits as pity, since he assumed the quiet developer felt sorry for how lost he always looked. And he had interpreted Min-jun's sudden, intense interest in his opinions on marketing copy as Min-jun being just a really friendly person, a conclusion he'd reached despite multiple coworkers warning him, half joking, that Min-jun was friendly to almost no one. Jae-won thanked all three of them sincerely, individually, for their patience with him, completely unaware that each conversation had, from the other side, felt like a small, private miracle. Chapter 5. The code that said too much Sae-byeok's plan when it finally arrived was the most Sae-byeok plan imaginable. Quiet, clever, and executed with all the emotional intelligence of a man who had spent more of his adult life talking to compilers than to people. He decided he would tell Jae-won how he felt through code. Specifically, through a small internal tool he built, ostensibly a welcome dashboard for new hires that displayed helpful company information, with one extra hidden feature. If you clicked a particular Easter egg button in the corner 3 times, it would reveal a short message he'd written and hidden inside a comment block, the kind of thing only someone who went digging in the source code would ever find. The message read in its entirety, "If you're reading this, it means you're curious enough to look past what's on the surface. I think that's the nicest thing about you." As it was, by any reasonable standard, a genuinely sweet confession. Sae-byeok had rewritten it 11 times to get the tone right. He'd spent 2 nights on it. He was, quietly, enormously proud of it. Unfortunately, Jae-won had never once, in his entire life, opened a browser's developer tools, did not know what source code meant beyond a vague sense that it was the computer version of a recipe, and interacted with the welcome dashboard exactly once, on his first day, before promptly forgetting it existed. The Easter egg button sat untouched. The comment block sat undiscovered. Sae-byeok's confession lived and died entirely inside a file that no human being would ever read again, watched over by nothing but the dashboard's cheerful mascot, a cartoon fox that Ariam had insisted on adding for warmth. Sae-byeok checked the dashboard's click analytics every day for a week, watching the counter on his secret button sit stubbornly at 0, and told absolutely no one why he seemed to be in a slightly worse mood than usual. It was Min-jun, of all people, who eventually cracked the mystery, cornering Sae-byeok at the coffee machine, the fixed one mercifully, with the directness of a man incapable of subtlety. "You like him too," Min-jun said, not a question. Sae-byeok considered lying. He was bad at lying, so he didn't bother. "Does it matter?" "It matters a normal amount," Min-jun said, "which is to say a lot because I also like him, and so does Tae-ho, in case you hadn't noticed the man doing surveillance-level loitering by the intern's desk for 2 weeks straight." There was a very long silence. "That's a problem," Sae-byeok said finally. "That's a problem," Min-jun agreed. Chapter 6. The meeting that wasn't about work, the confrontation, if you could call it that, given that all 3 men involved were, in their own ways, professionally allergic to direct emotional conversation, happened in the small glass meeting room on the 9th floor that everyone called the fishbowl because of how visible it was to the rest of the office. Tae-ho had been summoned by Min-jun's cryptic Slack message. "Meeting room, 4 p.m., bring your feelings, don't bring your ego," and arrived exactly on time, suspicious and immaculately composed, to find Sae-byeok already seated with the specific posture of a man who would rather be anywhere else on earth. "What is this?" Tae-ho said, sitting. "This," Min-jun said, closing the blinds partway so the rest of the office couldn't fully see in, though they could absolutely still see the shapes of 3 men having what looked like a very tense business meeting, "is an intervention. For us, because it turns out we're all in love with the same disaster intern, and none of us have noticed we're competing until now. And if we keep going the way we're going, one of us is going to accidentally set the office on fire trying to impress him." Again, that was one time, Min-jun added to Tae-ho's raised eyebrow. Tae-ho's jaw tightened. He did not, generally, enjoy surprises, and he especially did not enjoy the surprise of learning that 2 other men, one of whom was, infuriatingly, quite likable even when Tae-ho didn't want him to be, had been quietly falling for the same person he'd been failing to properly ask out for 2 weeks. "I wasn't aware this was a competition," Tae-ho said carefully. "It wasn't," Sae-byeok said. "That's the problem." There was a silence in which all three men considered, separately, whether to simply lie and pretend this conversation had never happened, walk out, and go back to quietly sabotaging each other without ever admitting it out loud. It was Min-jun, unsurprisingly, who broke first, because staying quiet for more than 90 seconds was physically difficult for him. "Look," he said, "I don't want to fight you two over him, genuinely. That sounds exhausting, and also he'd probably notice. And he'd feel terrible, because that's the kind of person he is. He'd think it was his fault somehow, like he did something wrong just by existing near us. So here's what I'm proposing." He spread his hands. "We stop hiding it from him and from each other. Whatever happens, happens. If he only wants one of us, fine. If he doesn't want any of us, also fine. Though personally I think that outcome is unlikely. Have you seen the way he apologizes to us like we're doing him a favor by breathing near him? But we stop the secret operations. No more solo missions." Tae-ho looked at Sae-byeok. Sae-byeok looked back and shrugged, which from Sae-byeok was the equivalent of a passionate speech. "Fine," Tae-ho said, like the word cost him something. "No more solo missions." None of them notably said the word harem, or sharing, or anything close to admitting what whatever happens, happens, might actually mean if the answer turned out to be all three of you simultaneously. That conversation would come much later, and it would be even more awkward than this one. Chapter 7. Reservation for Two, ruined by one Tae-ho, being Tae-ho, interpreted, "No more solo missions. As I still get to plan mine, I just have to tell them about it afterward." Which was not exactly the spirit of the agreement, but was, he reasoned, close enough. His plan was the most expensive and the most doomed. He'd made a reservation, 3 weeks in advance, a small, quiet restaurant known for a 9-course tasting menu and a strict no-cancellation policy, under the entirely reasonable assumption that a carefully chosen, elegant dinner would communicate his intentions clearly without requiring him to say anything embarrassing out loud, which was, frankly, his ideal outcome for any emotional interaction. He invited Jaewon under the pretense of a team dinner to discuss onboarding feedback, which was technically true in the sense that Tae-ho intended to feed him, and also, separately, discuss the trajectory of his own heart, though he did not phrase it that way in the calendar invite. Jaewon, thrilled to be included in something that sounded professional and important, spent the whole afternoon nervous about making a good impression, which was, in retrospect, the root of everything that went wrong. He arrived at the restaurant 11 minutes early, a personal record for punctuality, wearing his one good jacket, and immediately noticed that the restaurant's entrance had a small brass plaque explaining a quiet dining policy, phones to be left in a basket at the door. Wanting desperately to seem like the kind of sophisticated, together person who belonged somewhere with a quiet dining policy, Jaewon placed his phone in the basket exactly as instructed, then sat down at the small, private table Tae-ho had reserved, and waited. What he did not know was that Tae-ho, running 4 minutes late because of a last-minute call from a vendor, had tried to text him, "Running late, order the wine, I trust your taste," which, given your history with the coffee machine, terrifies me slightly, but I trusted anyway, a message that, had Jaewon received it, might have been the first genuinely flirtatious thing Tae-ho had ever sent anyone in his adult life. Jaewon's phone, of course, was in the basket by the door, silent and unread. 12 minutes passed. Jaewon, increasingly anxious that he'd somehow gotten the date wrong, or the time wrong, or the restaurant wrong, and terrified of seeming rude by checking his phone in a place that had explicitly asked him not to, sat rigidly at the table doing mental math about whether it would be worse to leave or to keep waiting. He decided, with the kind of tragic, well-meaning logic that defined his entire existence, that the respectful thing to do was to leave quietly rather than make a scene, assuming Tae-ho had been called away for something more important and simply hadn't found a moment to tell him. He left a note with the host, "Sorry I couldn't wait. Hope everything's okay. See you at work tomorrow." Paid for a bottle of water he hadn't ordered because he felt guilty taking up the table, and walked home in the rain without an umbrella, feeling vaguely, inexplicably sad in a way he couldn't fully explain to himself. Tae-ho arrived 6 minutes later to an empty table, a confused host, and a note that made something in his chest twist painfully. He did not that night understand that he had just experienced the exact same specific flavor of disaster that had already ruined 2 other confessions. He only knew that somewhere between the vendor call and the restaurant door, he had lost his chance, and he had no idea how to get it back. He was going to find out very soon that he was not alone in that feeling, and that the 3 of them were about to have a much longer conversation than the one in the fishbowl. Chapter 8, The Sad Sandwich Incident. Jaewon did not tell anyone about the restaurant. It didn't seem like the kind of thing worth mentioning. Team lead Choi had probably gotten pulled into something urgent. That was all, and making a fuss about it would only be embarrassing for both of them. He arrived at work the next morning determined to act completely normal, which, for Jaewon, meant overcompensating so hard that he became instantly, obviously suspicious to everyone who knew him even slightly. He brought pastries for the whole office. He said, "Good morning," to people who did not typically receive good mornings from him, including the security guard, the mail cart, and at one unfortunate point, a mannequin the design team had left by the elevator for a photo shoot. He smiled so determinedly at his desk that a passing junior designer asked, quietly, if he was having a stroke. Tae-ho watched all of this from across the floor with the particular guilt of a man who knew exactly why the intern was acting strange, and could not figure out how to bring it up without confessing everything at once, in the middle of the office, over the sound of the printer jamming for the third time that week. He settled in the end for buying Jaewon a sandwich. It was not a smooth gesture. Tae-ho did not do smooth gestures. Smoothness required a kind of casual confidence he simply did not possess when it came to matters of the heart, despite being, by every professional metric, one of the most composed people in the building. He walked up to Jaewon's desk at 12:47 p.m., set down a sandwich from the good bakery 3 blocks away, the one with the long line, the one he had personally waited in for 11 minutes, and said, "You didn't eat lunch." "How do you know I didn't eat lunch?" "I know things," Tae-ho said, which was true, and also deeply unsettling, and also not actually an answer. Jaewon, touched and confused in roughly equal measure, opened the sandwich immediately and took an enormous bite, mostly to have something to do with his mouth other than ask the question actually sitting in his chest. "Are you upset with me about last night?" He didn't ask it. Tae-ho didn't bring it up either. They sat in a silence that was, for the first time since Jaewon had started working there, comfortable rather than awkward, right up until Jaewon's elbow knocked his coffee directly into Tae-ho's open laptop, at which point the silence ended very abruptly, along with, tragically, the laptop. "I'll pay for it," Jaewon said immediately, in the exact same tone he'd used on his very first day. Tae-ho, watching coffee drip steadily off the edge of his desk while 3 months of unsaved product roadmap notes flickered and died on the screen, found himself, against every instinct of professional self-preservation, laughing. Not politely, not performatively. An actual laugh surprised out of him, the kind he hadn't produced in the office in longer than he could remember. "It's fine," he said, still laughing, wiping his laptop with the same handkerchief he'd used on the coffee machine 3 weeks earlier, which had apparently become his designated hand Jaewon disaster cloth. "I have backups. You're not mad." "I am extremely mad," Tae-ho said in a voice that suggested the opposite, "and I would like you to have lunch with me again tomorrow somewhere with less electronic equipment." Jaewon blinked, processed, decided generously that this was simply Tae-ho being kind to the office disaster out of some sense of managerial duty, and agreed enthusiastically, completely unaware that he had just, by total accident, said yes to something Tae-ho had been trying and failing to arrange for nearly a month. Chapter 9. 3 men compare notes, badly. By the time the second week of no more solo missions rolled around, it had become obvious to Min-jun and Yoon Sae-byeok that Tae-ho was, once again, quietly running his own operation, sandwich by sandwich, lunch by lunch, in flagrant violation of the fishbowl agreement. "He's doing the thing," Min-jun announced, sliding into the seat across from Yoon Sae-byeok in the break room with the outrage of a man who had personally been wronged. "The lunch thing. Every day this week." "I'm aware," Yoon Sae-byeok said, not looking up from his laptop where he was, in theory, debugging a payment integration issue, and in practice was watching, through the break room's glass wall, Tae-ho and Jaewon eating instant noodles together at the low table by the window. Jaewon gesturing animatedly about something while Tae-ho watched him with an expression Yoon Sae-byeok had genuinely never seen on the man's face in 3 years of working together. "Are we just going to let him win by attrition?" Min-jun demanded. "What would you propose instead? A duel?" Min-jun considered this with more seriousness than the question warranted. "I could beat him at badminton. There's a company tournament next month. That's not the same thing as winning someone's heart. It's a start." Yoon Sae-byeok closed his laptop finally and looked at Min-jun properly. "You know this isn't actually a competition against each other, right? We agreed. Whatever happens, happens. If he wants Tae-ho, then he wants Tae-ho, and that has to be okay, or none of this meant anything back in the fishbowl." "I know that," Min-jun said, a little defensively, running a hand through his bleached tips. I don't want to be the one who didn't even try. That's worse than losing. There was something unexpectedly honest in it, and Sae-byeok, who understood exactly that feeling, having watched his own carefully coded confession sit unread and unloved inside a file no one would ever open, softened. Then try, Sae-byeok said. Just try in a way that doesn't involve a rooftop fire alarm. That was one time, Min-jun said, for the second time in this story, and it would not be the last. What neither of them said, but both of them were quietly starting to understand, was that watching Tae-ho and Jae-won together didn't actually feel like losing. It felt strangely like watching something good happen to someone who deserved it, which was an inconvenient thing to feel when you were supposedly in competition with the man causing it. Neither of them mentioned this to Tae-ho. It would take several more chapters, several more disasters, and one extremely uncomfortable staff dinner before any of the three of them said the word that actually described what was happening to all of them at once. That word was not competition. Chapter 10. Min-jun tries something normal, somehow fails anyway, determined not to let his rooftop disaster define him forever. Min-jun decided his next attempt would be aggressively, deliberately ordinary. No rooftops, no grand gestures, just two people getting boba like normal human beings who did not require a fire department to be present. He asked Jae-won on a Thursday, in the most casual voice he could manufacture, which was still, admittedly, delivered with the theatrical confidence of someone used to being watched. Hey, there's a new boba place 2 blocks from here. I've heard good things. Want to check it out after work? Jae-won, who had by this point developed a working theory that the entire marketing team was simply required by some unwritten office culture rule to be extremely friendly to interns, said yes immediately, delighted at the invitation, and spent the rest of the afternoon feeling unreasonably cheerful about boba. The outing itself went, by Nexroom standards, remarkably well. They got matching drinks, Min-jun insisted, calling it boba bonding, a phrase Jae-won found so charming he repeated it twice. And Min-jun, freed from the pressure of an elaborate plan, was simply himself. Funny, warm, full of ridiculous stories about past marketing campaigns gone hilariously wrong, including one where he'd accidentally sent a company-wide email addressed to "My beloved idiots" instead of the marketing team. A typo that had somehow become an affectionate in-joke rather than a fireable offense. Jae-won laughed so hard at one story that boba pearls went down the wrong pipe, and Min-jun, without thinking, purely on reflex, reached across the table and patted his back while he coughed, hand lingering just slightly longer than necessary, and something in the air between them shifted, briefly, into something neither of them named out loud. It was, in fact, going so well that Min-jun very nearly said something real. He had the words halfway formed, "I like you. I've liked you since the fire alarm," which is a genuinely humiliating sentence to say out loud, but I'm saying it anyway. When Jae-won's phone rang, and Jae-won, apologizing profusely, answered it, because it was his landlord, and his landlord did not call for pleasant reasons. The pleasant reason, it turned out, was a burst pipe in his building, and Jae-won left in an anxious hurry to go deal with it, thanking Min-jun 3 times over his shoulder for the boba, completely unaware that he had walked out of the one normal, disaster-free date the 3 men had managed to arrange in 3 weeks, seconds before it could become something more. Min-jun sat alone at the table, watching the door swing shut, holding a nearly finished confession in his mouth that no one had been there to hear. "I really can't win," he told the empty cup in front of him. He did not, of course, blame Jae-won for any of it. How could he, when the boy's biggest crime that evening had been having a landlord with terrible timing? But it was becoming increasingly, painfully clear to all 3 of them that something about this particular pursuit seemed cursed at a level beyond normal romantic bad luck. It was starting to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern. And patterns, Min-jun thought, walking home with 2 mostly full boba cups because Jae-won had forgotten his, were the kind of thing you eventually had to stop laughing about and start solving. Chapter 11. A very strange kind of alliance. The 3 of them ended up back in the fishbowl on Friday evening, long after most of the office had gone home, comparing their respective failures with the grim solidarity of soldiers returning from the same disastrous battle. "A fire alarm," Min-jun said, counting on his fingers. "A confession hidden in code that no one will ever read. A dinner reservation ruined by a phone-free dining policy, and now a burst pipe. Tell me honestly, do either of you think the universe is doing this on purpose?" "I don't believe in that," Sae-byeok said, though he said it without much conviction, glancing at the 4 consecutive disasters laid out between them like evidence at a crime scene. "I believe in bad luck," Tae-ho said. "I also believe we are, collectively, 3 grown adults with responsible jobs who have been repeatedly, spectacularly defeated by one extremely well-meaning intern's inability to notice when he's being courted." "Say that slower," Min-jun said. "I want to enjoy how sad it is." Tae-ho did not dignify that with a response, though the corner of his mouth twitched, which for Tae-ho counted as visible amusement. It was Yoon Sae-byeok, ultimately, who said the thing none of them had quite been willing to say out loud, not because it was difficult to admit, but because admitting it made everything that came after unavoidably real. "I don't think this is really about bad luck," he said slowly. "I think it's that none of us have actually told him, not clearly, not in words he could understand without a decoder or a working phone or an open door. We've been trying to say it through gestures. Dinners, Easter eggs, rooftop timing, and gestures require him to already suspect something, and he doesn't. He's not going to accidentally connect the dots on his own. He genuinely doesn't think anyone here could like him like that, so maybe the actual problem isn't the universe conspiring against us." He paused, folding his hands. "Maybe it's that we all need to just say it. Directly, all 3 of us together, so there's no more room for accidents to get in the way." The other 2 sat with that for a long moment. "Together," Min-jun repeated, testing the word. "As in all 3 of us tell him at once? That's a lot for one guy to process. He might actually short-circuit." "He handles worse every day before 10 a.m., Tae-ho said dryly, then quieter, more serious. "But Yoon Sae-byeok's right. We've been trying to be clever about this. Clever hasn't worked once. Maybe the only thing left that hasn't failed is just being honest." Outside the fishbowl's glass walls, the office had gone dark and quiet, the city lights outside glowing steady and indifferent to the 3 men inside quietly, finally agreeing on a plan that involved no rooftops, no hidden code, and no restaurant reservations. Just the truth, said plainly, to the one person who had somehow become impossible for all 3 of them to stop thinking about. They didn't know yet that even this plan would go wrong before it went right. But for the first time since this whole strange, chaotic chapter of their lives had begun, they weren't facing it separately. Chapter 12. The calm before Part 1 closer. Jae-won, blissfully unaware that a small, quietly historic alliance had just been formed on his behalf 2 floors above the parking garage. Spent that same Friday evening at home mopping up the last of his landlord's burst pipe with a bath towel, feeling generally content with how his first month at Nexroom had gone. He thought about the sandwich Tae-ho had bought him, and the boba with Min-jun, and the strange, oddly personal error messages Yoon Sae-byeok kept, accidentally, showing him on the shared dashboard. Funny little notes about bugs that always seemed to be phrased more warmly than actual bug reports usually were. He thought, briefly, that Nexroom was maybe the first workplace where people had ever gone out of their way to be kind to him without him having to earn it first. And the thought made his chest feel warm in a way he didn't examine too closely, mostly because he assumed examining it would somehow ruin it. He did not, even for a second, consider that being kind to him might be an undersell for what was actually happening. That 3 of the company's most competent, most guarded people had each, independently, fallen for the office's most catastrophic hire, and had just spent an hour in a glass meeting room deciding, together, to finally tell him so. He fell asleep on the couch, still slightly damp from the pipe disaster, phone charging on the floor beside him, blissfully unaware that Monday morning was about to change absolutely everything. Chapter 13, Monday, and the group chat that changed everything. The plan, as agreed in the fishbowl, was simple. No more solo missions, no more clever gestures, just the 3 of them telling Jae-won the truth, together, honestly, on Monday after work. The execution of the plan was, predictably, immediately compromised by the fact that all 3 men still worked at the same startup, in the same open-plan office, where privacy was a resource roughly as scarce as parking spaces. They couldn't exactly pull Jae-won into the fishbowl for the talk, without the entire office watching through the glass walls and drawing their own, extremely accurate conclusions within about 4 minutes. So they did what any group of modern professionals would do when faced with an emotionally significant conversation. They tried to arrange it over a group chat first, to coordinate timing, which in practice meant a slow-motion catastrophe unfolding in real time across 3 phones. Min-jun, okay, so are we doing this today or Tae-ho after work? Somewhere private, not the office. Yoon Sae-byeok, the rooftop garden is technically private after 7 p.m. when the after-hours cleaning crew clears out Min-jun. Absolutely not the rooftop. I have a personal history with that rooftop. Tae-ho, my apartment then, neutral ground, no fire alarms, no restaurants, no code. Sae-byeok, agreed Min-jun. Agreed, though I wanted on record that I still think a nice dinner would have been romantic if literally anything had gone right the first 3 times we tried this exact thing, unfortunately. The group chat in question was called, per a joke Min-jun had made weeks earlier that no one had bothered to rename, Operation Disaster Boy. And unfortunately, Min-jun, mid-conversation, laughing at his own joke, phone in one hand and coffee in the other, accidentally forwarded the entire chat thread to the wrong contact. He meant to forward a single message to Sae-byeok, clarifying a time. He instead forwarded the last 40 messages of Operation Disaster Boy, containing 3 weeks of increasingly unfiltered romantic commentary about Han Jae-won directly to Han Jae-won. Jae-won's phone buzzed at his desk. He glanced down, expecting a calendar reminder, and instead found himself staring at a message thread titled Operation Disaster Boy, containing, among other things, the sentence, "I don't think this is really about bad luck. I think it's that none of us have actually told him," sent by a contact saved in his phone as Sae-byeok, Dev, glasses guy, very quiet, seems nice. He read it twice, then a third time. Then he looked up slowly across the open office floor at 3 men who, one by one, in a horrifying chain reaction that took approximately 11 seconds, each felt their own phones buzz with Min-jun's frantic, too-late follow-up message. "Wait, no, I sent it to the wrong." Choi Tae-ho went very still. Yoon Sae-byeok's face went the particular shade of red that only happened to men who had spent their whole lives avoiding exactly this kind of exposure. Kang Min-jun dropped his coffee, which, given everything that had happened to this office's various beverages over the past month, felt almost thematically appropriate. And Han Jae-won, disaster intern, chronic misreader of rooms, sat frozen at his desk holding a phone that had just, by total accident, told him everything 3 grown men had spent a month failing to say to his face. Chapter 14. The longest elevator ride in company history. Nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. Then, in the specific way that group crises tend to resolve themselves through sheer social pressure, all 3 men found themselves converging on the elevator bank at the same moment Jae-won did. All 4 of them heading, without discussion, toward the parking garage exit at exactly the wrong, or exactly the right, time. The elevator doors closed on all 4 of them at once. Nobody pressed a floor button for several seconds, which meant the elevator simply sat there, doors shut, going nowhere, while 4 people who had somehow ended up in this exact configuration searched desperately for something to say. "So," Min-jun said finally because someone had to, and it was never going to be anyone but him. "You read the group chat?" "I read the group chat," Jae-won confirmed, in the voice of someone still actively rebooting his entire understanding of the last month of his life. "In my defense," Min-jun said, "I meant to send that to one person, not the person it was about, which is, in retrospect, a distinction that doesn't actually help my case at all." "Is it true?" Jae-won asked, looking between the 3 of them, and there was something so raw and unguarded in the question, not accusatory, not upset, just genuinely, desperately trying to understand, that whatever composure Tae-ho had been holding onto quietly dissolved. "Yes," Tae-ho said, no qualifiers, no hedging, just the word clean and certain, the way he said things that mattered. "It's true. I've been trying to tell you for weeks. I bought you a sandwich on purpose. I made a dinner reservation on purpose. I have been, by every metric that matters, extremely bad at communicating something I feel very clearly, and I'm sorry it took an accidental group text to finally say it properly, but yes. It's true. The dashboard Easter egg," Sae-byeok said, quieter, not quite meeting Jae-won's eyes. "The one with the fox mascot. There's a message hidden in it. I wrote it for you. You never found it, which is fine. That's not your fault. I hid it too well, but I wanted you to know it exists. It says," he stopped, swallowed, pushed through. "It says I think the nicest thing about you is that you're curious enough to look past the surface of things. I think that's still true. I think it's the reason I like you as much as I do." "And the boba," Min-jun said, softer than his usual register, all his performative confidence stripped away for maybe the first time since Jae-won had met him. "That wasn't just boba bonding. I was trying to tell you something, and then your landlord called, and I sat there with your leftover boba like an idiot, and I thought, this is never going to work. The universe clearly doesn't want this to happen. But I don't actually believe that. I think the universe has just been having a laugh at our expense. I like you." I've liked you since the fire alarm went off and you looked more upset about ruining everyone's evening than about the actual chaos happening around you. That's when I knew. The elevator, mercifully, chose that moment to remain stubbornly stationary, giving Jaewon several more seconds of silence in which to process the fact that three separate, wildly different men had each, independently, fallen for him over the course of a single chaotic month, and that every strange kindness he'd spent weeks quietly attributing to office culture, or pity, or professional patience, had actually been something else entirely. I thought you all just felt sorry for me, Jaewon admitted finally, his voice small. I'm bad at this job, I break things, I ruin plans I don't even know I'm ruining. I genuinely thought the nicest interpretation of any of this was that you all just had unusually high tolerance for chaos. You didn't ruin anything, Sae-byeok said. You just didn't know what you were looking at, that's different. I don't know what to do with three answers at once, Jaewon said, laughing a little wetly, overwhelmed. I don't think there's a normal way to respond to this. There isn't, Tae-ho agreed. We've established pretty thoroughly that normal doesn't work for us, so don't worry about doing this the normal way. Chapter 15. What the company retreat made clear they didn't resolve everything in the elevator. That would have been too neat for a story that had, up to this point, refused every opportunity to be neat. Instead, the four of them spent the next week in a strange, tender, unresolved limbo, lunches that lingered longer than they needed to, glances held a beat too long, a group chat quietly renamed from Operation Disaster Boy to something considerably less incriminating, while Jaewon tried to figure out what he actually wanted. And the three men tried, with visibly increasing difficulty, not to pressure him into deciding faster than he was ready to. The clarity, when it came, arrived at the worst possible time. The company's annual overnight retreat, an event Ariam had scheduled months in advance to a lakeside resort 2 hours outside the city, blissfully unaware that she had just accidentally booked the exact 4 people currently untangling a 4-way emotional knot into the same set of cabins for 48 consecutive hours. It was during the retreat's mandatory, trust-building, kayaking exercise, an activity that put Jaewon in a boat with all 3 men rotating through as partners over the course of the afternoon. Because the resort had run out of kayaks and improvised a group rotation, that everything finally, unavoidably came together. Jaewon capsized twice. This was expected. Disaster followed him even onto open water. What was not expected was that each time he went under, a different pair of hands hauled him back up, first Min-jun's, laughing so hard he nearly capsized them both again. Then Sae-byeok's, steady and quiet, checking with quick, careful precision that Jaewon hadn't hit his head. Then, on the final capsize, Tae-ho's, pulling him against his chest in the cold lake water with an urgency that had nothing to do with company liability waivers. Soaked, shivering, laughing despite himself, Jaewon sat on the dock afterward wrapped in 3 different jackets that had all been offered to him at once, looking at 3 faces watching him with 3 different flavors of the same expression, and understood, with sudden and complete clarity, something he'd been circling for a week without quite landing on it. He didn't have to choose. Not because choosing was impossible, but because nothing about what he felt actually pointed toward choosing. He liked the quiet, steady weight of Tae-ho's attention, the way the man's composure cracked open just for him. He liked the warmth and noise and easy joy Min-jun brought into every room, the way being near him felt like sunlight. He liked the careful, patient depth of Sae-byeok, the way he noticed things nobody else bothered to notice, the message hidden in a comment block that had waited weeks for him to find it. He didn't feel like a smaller version of himself with any one of them. He felt somehow like a more complete version of himself with all 3. I don't want to pick, he said, out loud to the dock, to the lake, to 3 men who had gone very quiet waiting for him to finish the sentence. I know that's probably not how this is supposed to work. I know it's complicated and probably weird, and I don't actually know if all 3 of you would even be okay with whatever this would mean. But I don't want to lose any of you by pretending I only feel one thing when I don't. There was a silence that stretched just long enough to make Jaewon's stomach drop, certain he'd said something unforgivable. Then Min-jun laughed, not mocking, just relieved, bright and real, and said, Buddy, we already had this exact conversation in a glass meeting room a month ago. We agreed whatever happens, happens. If whatever happens means all 3 of us, I'm not exactly going to file a complaint. Same, Sae-byeok said simply. Tae-ho, who had never in his life been the one to say the easy thing first, looked at Jaewon for a long moment, dripping lake water and startled hope in equal measure, and said, I told you once to try the coffee machine on the third floor because it was harder to break. I think I've since learned that some things are worth the risk of breaking anyway. He paused. Yes, all three of us, however that looks. I'd rather have a complicated version of this than a simple version of nothing. Chapter 15.5, 3 First Dates. One very confused front desk word travels fast in a company small enough that everyone shares one break room. And by Monday morning, the entire office had somehow already heard a heavily embellished version of the kayak thing, despite none of the 4 people actually involved having said anything to anyone. Ariam, informed by no fewer than 6 separate employees before 9 a.m., simply sighed, opened a company-wide calendar invite titled Team Sync Mandatory, bring snacks, no questions, and used the resulting meeting to announce, with the weary calm of someone who had seen everything a startup could possibly throw at her, that whatever her staff did in their personal lives was their own business, provided it did not involve the fire department a second time. What followed was not, strictly, a single relationship in the tidy, singular sense most people meant when they used that word. It was something looser, and in its own chaotic way, more deliberate, 3 separate men each taking the time, individually, to build something real with Jaewon before any of them tried to figure out what the whole shape of it looked like together. Min-jun's first real date, the kind with an actual stated purpose, no fake meetings involved, was a night market 2 subway stops from the office, chosen specifically because it was loud, bright, and utterly impossible to ruin with a fire alarm, since it was already outdoors and already chaotic by design. He bought Jaewon 3 different kinds of fried skewers, lost spectacularly at a ring toss game while insisting he was just warming up, and won, eventually, a small stuffed fox that he presented with the exaggerated ceremony of a knight bestowing a sword, informing Jaewon it was, obviously, meant to remind him of Yoon Sae-byeok's dashboard mascot, so you never forget which of us you're currently annoyed at. I'm never annoyed at any of you, Jaewon said, hugging the fox anyway. Give it time, Min-jun said, grinning, and slung an arm around his shoulders as they walked, easy and warm, exactly the way Jaewon had quietly hoped it might feel. Yoon Sae-byeok's date was smaller, quieter, and entirely his own kind of romantic. He invited Jaewon over to his apartment, cluttered with monitors, an alarming number of mechanical keyboards, and one extremely spoiled cat, and spent 2 hours patiently teaching him to read basic code, not because Jaewon needed the skill for his job, but because Yoon Sae-byeok wanted, more than almost anything, for Jaewon to be able to find that hidden message himself, the way it had been meant to be found. It took him 40 minutes of guided clicking, a lot of laughing at his own confusion, and one triumphant shout when the comment block finally rendered on screen. He read it in silence, then read it again, and when he looked up at Yoon Sae-byeok, his eyes were suspiciously bright. You really wrote this weeks ago? The day after your first week, Yoon Sae-byeok admitted. I've been waiting for you to find it since the first day I posted it. I almost gave up hoping. I'm glad you didn't, Jaewon said, and kissed him carefully, a little shyly in the cluttered light of 3 monitors and one unimpressed cat, and Yoon Sae-byeok, who rarely allowed himself to want things out loud, decided this had been worth every one of the 11 rewrites. Tae-ho's date, unsurprisingly, was the reservation he'd never gotten to use. The same restaurant, the same 9-course tasting menu, booked again 3 weeks in advance, except this time he personally walked Jaewon to the door, phone basket and all, made absolutely certain both of their devices were accounted for before they sat down, and spent the evening being, for the first time since Jaewon had met him, completely unguarded, telling him about growing up the eldest son of a family that valued composure over almost everything else, about how exhausting it was to be the person everyone assumed had no feelings worth asking about how disarming it had been to meet someone who spilled coffee on his laptop and made him laugh so hard he'd forgotten, for a moment, to be composed at all. I don't think anyone's ever seen you like this, Jaewon said quietly, near the end of the meal, watching candlelight catch on features that had gone soft in a way the rest of the office would never believe if he described it. No, Tae-ho agreed. I don't let many people see me like this. He reached across the table, deliberate and certain, and took Jaewon's hand. I'm glad it's you. Chapter 16, CC. Everyone on purpose this time. 3 months later, Nexroom's office had adjusted to the new normal with the swift, gossipy efficiency of any small company where everyone knows everyone's business within about a day and a half. There had been an initial flurry of whispered speculation, one extremely awkward all-staff meeting where Ariam had announced, deadpan, I would like it on record that HR has confirmed there's no policy against this, because apparently that needed confirming, and a slow, steady settling into something that looked, from the outside, remarkably functional. Jaewon was still, by any objective measure, a chaotic employee. He had just that week managed to lock himself out of the server room while inside it, a feat multiple engineers had examined and declared structurally difficult to explain. He still called Ariam, sir, under moments of extreme stress. He had never once, not a single time, remembered his own desk phone extension. But something in him had settled, too. The constant, low hum of anxious over-apology had quieted, replaced by something steadier, something that came from three separate people, each making it clear, in their own ways every single day, that his chaos wasn't a burden anyone was tolerating. It was just part of him, and it turned out to be a part three very different men had each fallen for, independently, before any of them knew the others existed. Min-jun still teased him mercilessly and fed him constantly. Yoon Sae-byeok still hid small, warm messages in unexpected places. A shared document, a code comment, a sticky note on his monitor, except now Jaewon actually knew to look for them. Tae-ho still brought him lunch from the good bakery, though the ratio of sandwiches to actual sit-down meals where they talked about their days had shifted steadily in favor of the latter. The fire alarm from the rooftop, months later, became the office's favorite story to tell new hires, usually followed by a pointed look at Min-jun, and the phrase, "Ask him about the rooftop sometime," which Min-jun had somehow turned into a point of pride rather than embarrassment. On a Friday evening in early autumn, the four of them ended up on that same rooftop, deliberately this time, with the fire sensor confirmed fixed by three separate maintenance requests Tae-ho had personally followed up on, watching the city lights come on below them, the same golden hour view Min-jun had once tried and spectacularly failed to use as a backdrop for a single confession that had instead triggered a building-wide evacuation. "You know," Jaewon said, leaning back against the railing, flanked on either side, "I used to think I was just bad at this job." "You are bad at this job?" Yoon Sae-byeok said, without missing a beat, and Jaewon swatted at him, laughing. "I mean," Jaewon continued, "I thought all the chaos was a problem, something I needed to fix to be worth the patience everyone kept showing me. I didn't realize the chaos was just how we all found each other. If I'd been good at this job, none of this would have happened. Tae-ho never would have noticed me over a broken coffee machine. Min-jun never would have had a reason to text me about a fake meeting. Yoon Sae-byok's dumb dashboard would have just been a dumb dashboard." "It's not a dumb dashboard," Yoon Sae-byok said with real wounded dignity. "It has a very good fox mascot." "The point stands," Jaewon said, smiling, comfortable in a way he hadn't let himself be comfortable in a very long time. "I broke everything, and somehow that's the reason I got exactly what I didn't know I was looking for." Tae-ho, arms settled easily around him now, in a gesture that had taken months to feel natural and now felt like the easiest thing in the world, looked out at the city and said, quietly, mostly to himself, "For the record, I still think you should learn to use the coffee machine properly." "Absolutely not," Jaewon said. "If I fix that, what's my whole personality?" Below them, the office emptied out for the weekend. The same glass building that had witnessed a fire alarm, a hidden confession no one read, a ruined dinner reservation, an accidentally forwarded group chat, and eventually 4 people finding their way to something that made sense out of all that chaos, not despite the disaster, but because of it. Chapter 17. Epilogue. 1 year later, a year is a long time in startup years, which move roughly 3 times faster than regular years due to a combination of deadlines, funding rounds, and the sheer velocity of gossip in a building with too much open floor plan and not enough soundproofing. In that year, Nexroom had grown from 40 employees to 65, moved the ball pit to a less structurally alarming corner of the office, and finally, mercifully, replaced the cursed lobby coffee machine with a model that even Jaewon, after several more incidents, physically could not break, no matter how hard he apparently kept trying. He was no longer technically an intern. His job title, after a performance review that Ariam described as genuinely one of the strangest documents HR has ever had to write, because half of it is disasters and the other half is customer feedback calling you the nicest person who's ever helped me with a billing issue, had become Junior Client Success Coordinator, a role that, against all odds, actually suited him. It turned out that a person who apologized sincerely, noticed when someone was upset, and never once made a customer feel stupid for asking a basic question was extremely good at customer success. Chaos elsewhere in his life notwithstanding, the 4 of them had settled into a rhythm that, from the outside, looked unconventional, and from the inside felt, increasingly, like the only version of normal any of them actually wanted. They didn't live together, not yet, though the topic had come up more than once over shared dinners that had, gradually, stopped needing a stated occasion. Min-jun still called it the group chat that started it all, now renamed for the fourth time, currently titled Family Chat No Fire Alarms Allowed. Sae-byeok had, quietly, without telling anyone, added a second Easter egg to the internal dashboard. This one far easier to find, deliberately so, that simply read when clicked. Still glad you're curious enough to look. 1 year later. Tae-ho had stopped waiting 11 minutes in line at the Good Bakery because he'd finally just asked them to start a standing order. On the anniversary of the fire alarm, a date Min-jun had, without any of them asking him to, started treating as a genuine occasion worth celebrating. The four of them went back up to the rooftop, this time with actual snacks, a blanket, and zero risk of triggering building-wide chaos. To disaster, Min-jun said, raising a can of the same convenience store coffee he'd been drowning his sorrows in exactly 1 year earlier, back when he thought he'd ruined his only chance. To disaster, Sae-byeok echoed, clinking his can against Min-jun's with more warmth than either of them would have predicted a year ago, back when they'd been quietly, awkwardly competing for the same person's attention without knowing the other existed. To disaster, Tae-ho said last, dry as ever, though the smile he aimed at Jaewon gave away exactly how much that dryness was covering. Jaewon looked at the three of them, the ice-cold team lead who turned out to be the softest of all of them once you got past the composure, the quiet developer who'd hidden his whole heart in a line of code and waited months for someone to find it, the loud, warm marketing ace who'd never once stopped trying even after every plan blew up in his face, and thought, not for the first time, that he still didn't fully understand how a company that hired him purely by administrative accident had somehow, through a truly baffling chain of coffee spills, fire alarms, and forwarded texts, given him exactly what he never knew he was looking for. To disaster, he agreed, raising his own can and meant it completely. Somewhere below them, the city lights came on one by one, steady and unbothered, the way they always had been through every ruined plan and every accidental confession. Patient, it turned out, for exactly this. But before that quiet rooftop toast, there had been one more test neither Jaewon nor the other three had seen coming, and it was worth telling, because it was the moment the whole office finally stopped whispering and started instead to understand. Chapter 18, the pitch that almost fell apart, and didn't 3 months into whatever this new, strange, four-person arrangement had become. Nexroom landed its biggest potential client to date, a retail chain looking to overhaul its entire customer app. A contract large enough that Ariam had personally rearranged her schedule around it for 2 straight weeks. The pitch meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon. The whole senior team assembled. Months of preparation riding on 90 minutes in a conference room with people who held the company's near-term future in their hands. Naturally, it was Jaewon, technically not even part of the pitch team, only there to help set up, who managed, in the frantic 10 minutes before the client arrived, to spill an entire pitcher of water directly onto the laptop running the presentation, frying the machine that held the only local copy of the deck. The old Jaewon would have frozen, apologized 11 times, and quietly assumed his career at Nexroom was over. This Jaewon, instead, did something almost nobody in the office expected. He took a breath, grabbed his own phone, and said, "Sae-byeok, the dashboard has cloud backup, right? You built that redundancy in last month for exactly this kind of thing." Sae-byeok, halfway into a mild panic of his own, blinked, then nodded slowly. Yes, I did. Give me 90 seconds. While Sae-byeok worked, Min-jun, reflexes honed from months of improvising his way out of self-created disasters, smoothly intercepted the arriving clients in the hallway, buying time with easy charm and a story about, just finalizing a last-minute enhancement, which was technically not a lie. And Tae-ho, watching all of it unfold with the calm of a man who had, by this point, developed genuine faith in his 3-person support system, simply said, quietly, to Jaewon, "You didn't ruin this. You caught it fast enough that it isn't a disaster yet. That's the part that matters." 90 seconds became 4 minutes. The clients, gracious about the short delay, were seated exactly as Sae-byeok pulled the recovered deck onto a spare laptop, badly shaken but intact. The pitch went forward. It went, against every prior indicator that afternoon, extremely well. Ariam later said it was the strongest pitch she'd seen her team deliver, sharpened, if anything, by the adrenaline of the near-catastrophe just behind it. Afterward, in the elevator, the same elevator everyone silently noted, where an entire relationship had once been accidentally confessed via group chat, Jae-won let out a long breath and said, "I almost cost us the biggest deal in company history." "You didn't," Tae-ho said simply. "You told us fast. That's not the same person who used to leave apologetic notes with restaurant hosts instead of just checking his phone." "I've had good teachers," Jae-won said, and for once it wasn't self-deprecating. It was something closer to pride, quiet and real, in exactly how far he'd come since the day he'd broken the coffee machine on his very first morning. Word of the pitch day save spread through the office almost as fast as the kayak story had. Except this time, nobody whispered about it like gossip. They told it like the rest of the company's favorite disaster stories. The fire alarm, the group chat, the burst pipe. As one more chapter in the strange, chaotic, oddly beloved saga of the intern who broke everything, and somehow in the process fixed exactly the parts of 3 other people's lives that had needed fixing all along. That night was the rooftop toast. That night, watching the city lights below, none of them were thinking about disasters anymore, only about how far 4 extremely unlikely people had come to end up exactly where they were. Chapter 19, Bonus Scene. The HR meeting nobody wanted to have in the interest of completeness. It should be noted that somewhere between the kayak confession and the pitch day save, there had been one meeting the 4 of them dreaded more than any fire alarm, ruined dinner, or capsized boat. The mandatory sit-down with HR, scheduled the moment word of the situation, reached beyond casual office gossip, and into the realm of things a responsible company had to formally acknowledge. The HR representative, a soft-spoken, endlessly patient woman named Director O, who had, over her career, handled everything from expense report fraud to an incident involving a drone and the building's window-washing platform, sat the 4 of them down in a room considerably less glamorous than the fishbowl, opened a folder, and said, with the weary calm of someone who had clearly rehearsed this exact sentence in the mirror, "I want to start by saying there is no official policy against multiple employees dating the same coworker, provided none of the parties involved have a reporting relationship that creates a conflict of interest." "None of us report to each other," Tae-ho said immediately, in the tone of a man who had already checked this 3 times before the meeting. "I'm aware," Director O said. "I checked the org chart before this meeting specifically because I suspected I'd need to. Mr. Choi, you lead product. Mr. Yoon reports to the engineering lead, not you. Mr. Kang reports to marketing leadership, also not you. Mr. Han," she glanced at her folder, then at Jae-won with the faint, barely suppressed amusement of someone who had read his entire HR file, including the coffee machine incident report, the fire alarm incident report, the burst laptop incident report, and memorably, an incident report simply titled Server Room See Attached. Reports to client success, entirely separate from all 3 of you. So structurally, there's no conflict. "That's it," Min-jun said, visibly stunned that the meeting he'd been dreading for a week had resolved itself on a technicality. "We're not in trouble." "You are not in trouble," Director O confirmed. "I would like to note, purely for my own records, that this is genuinely one of the more unusual situations I've had to formally document in 12 years of HR work. I would also like to note that Boss Ariam specifically asked me to tell all 4 of you, and I'm quoting her directly here, please just be normal about this at the holiday party, I'm begging you." "We can be normal," Sae-byeok said, in a voice that suggested he was already fairly certain this was a lie. "You broke a rooftop fire sensor confessing feelings to him," Director O said, checking her folder again. "And then you," to Sae-byeok, "hit a message in production code that, and I want to stress this, could have been discovered by a client during a code audit, which would have been considerably more awkward for this company than anything currently happening in this room. And you, to Tae-ho, apparently made a reservation under a fake business pretext at a restaurant with a strict no-phone policy, specifically so he couldn't check his messages, which, had he found out at the time, might have read very differently than intended." There was a long, mortified silence. "When you list it like that," Min-jun said finally, "it does sound a little concerning." "It is a little concerning," Director O agreed, closing the folder with the air of someone glad to be done with the strangest paperwork of her month. "But for what it's worth, and this is genuinely off the record, it's also the first time in a while I've seen 4 people this happy walk into my office for what they clearly thought was going to be a disciplinary meeting. Try to keep the workplace chaos to a professional minimum going forward. That's all I ask." They left the meeting lighter than they'd entered it, Jaewon laughing so hard in the hallway afterward that Min-jun had to physically hold him upright, and somewhere in that shared laughter, 4 people who had each, in their own strange and clumsy way, found something in each other worth risking a little institutional embarrassment for, was the clearest sign yet of exactly how far they'd all come. Later that evening, back at his own apartment for the first time in days, Jaewon sat on his couch, the same couch he'd fallen asleep on, damp from a burst pipe, the night before everything changed, and scrolled back through the group chat's long, absurd history. The fire alarm apology, the boba phode, the frantic all-caps message that had accidentally exposed 3 men's feelings at once, the slow shift from chaos to something that finally felt steady. He thought about the version of himself who'd walked into Nexroom on his first day, certain his only contribution to the company would be property damage. That version of him could never have imagined this. 3 people, 3 completely different kinds of love, all somehow fitting around the shape of one very clumsy, very ordinary intern who had never once, not for a single day, felt like he deserved any of it. Right up until the day he simply stopped doubting it and let himself have it instead. He typed a message into the chat, thumb hovering for a second before he sent it. Jaewon, thank you for all of it, even the fire alarm. Min-jun, especially the fire alarm Choi Tae-ho. I still think the dashboard message was more romantic than the fire alarm Tae-ho. The sandwich was more romantic than both. Jaewon, you're all ridiculous. I love you. Min-jun, wait Choi Tae-ho, wait Tae-ho, say it again. Jaewon, smiling at his phone in the quiet of his apartment, did. Outside his window, the city carried on the way it always had, buses running late, neon signs flickering their nightly patterns. 1,000 small, ordinary disasters happening to 1,000 other people who had no idea how one broken coffee machine, 3 months earlier, had quietly rewritten the whole shape of 4 lives at once. Jaewon set his phone down, pulled a blanket over his knees, and let himself feel, for the first time without any hesitation at all, exactly as happy as he actually was. The end.